Good morning or afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's episode of RecruitMilitary Live. On behalf of myself and all of the RM family, we would love to wish you a happy belated July 4th. We hope everyone had an awesome, amazing, relaxing, celebratory time with your friends and family and loved ones. I am one of your co-hosts for today, Gabby Pettigrew, and I'm joined by the amazing
Raul Torres.
And today we are joined by a very special guest coming to us live from the great state of Ohio. He is a U.S. Army veteran and an accomplished author. His newest book being The Veteran Transition Journey, amazing public speaker, talent management coach with over 25 years of experiences in human resources. He is the president and chief advisor at Kieffer and Associates, where amongst other things, he can pursue his passion for coaching service members who are transitioning to their civilian careers, helping transitioning service members find and keep their new job, as well as helping them understand their new purpose and now the civilian environment. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Kieffer. Bill, welcome to the show.
Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everybody.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. I get to spend some time with you two great folks and all the listeners out there. So yeah, I'm doing great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we're very excited to hear about these main tips we have, because we all know it's one fight in itself to find a good career, a new job after transitioning from the military, finding that perfect fit. But even once that you do land that job, it's a whole other battle, a whole other process in keeping, maintaining, and thriving in that new environment, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I like to think of our kind of career journey as kind of like a parachute jump. You know, there's a whole lot of work you got to do ahead of the jump. You know, you get properly trained and properly equipped, then you got to properly prepare for the ride. You got to get checked out, then you got to get in the aircraft, you got to exit the door, and then you got to make sure, you know, you ride that puppy down real well, and then you got to land properly so you don't hurt yourself. And that's kind of like career transition, right? And then you find yourself in the drop zone going, now what? What do I do now? Those actions on the objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I get there. I landed my job. I successfully made it through transition. Well, what do I do once I'm there? So that's interesting. My second book just came out, and it's all about. Thank you. It's all about sharing insights. Myself and my co-author David White, an Army Ranger veteran, career. He was a Ranger First Sergeant. It's all about taking the lessons that we learned in our transition and go, what do you do to be successful after you land the job? And not just successful in the first couple days, but successful over time, so your life and your career don't get crosswise with each other.
Exactly. And that we know for sure. I know, speaking from my experience, and I'm sure Raul can attest to it as well, it's already such a huge transition and adjustment from the military working life and the flow and functionality of what we do every day versus whatever it is that we transition into the civilian sector. And that doesn't even include whether or not we're switching gears in careers. Like, say you worked in logistics for 10, 20 years in the military, and now you're working in HR or sales. It's that could in itself be a whole new transition. So we're very excited to hear what those words of wisdom are for not only finding and landing that position that in the civilian sector, but how to maintain and thrive and fit in and still set yourself apart from everyone else while in that new dream career.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Bill, it's it did feel like jumping out of a plane for sure. At least on my end, with or without a parachute, like you were going to transition. So it for some people it's a little smoother ride than others. In my experience, I had to really ground myself and say, hey, 6 months out, this is going to happen whether I'm ready or not. So let me put myself to work here and kind of figure out what resources were available to me. So I wanted to ask you, as far as the landing piece, because obviously you got to transition out the military and land somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How does your experience in giving advice to transitioning folk, like where would you push them to start that process?
So to start that process, I always tell people you got to start thinking about the uniform coming off the day you put it on. Now that's not real practical advice. Young folks are putting a uniform on. They're all focused on getting it right, surviving basic training, getting those promotions to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to however far up. But I tell people you got to start thinking about that transition, taking that uniform off as early as possible, as a practical kind of check mark. A couple years out, you really need to start thinking about your transition. And I think a lot of folks kind of make a classic problem-solving error. They start working on the technical tools and technique stuff. What they need to do is they need to start with themselves. They need to understand who they are. They need to understand what are they bringing to the party, good and bad, their capabilities, their passions, their maybe some of the bad things in their history that you just have to acknowledge. But they got to know who they are, what they're bringing to the party, and how they define success. I tell folks, you can't hit a target you haven't identified. You might accidentally hit it, but you're not going to likely hit a target if you can't identify it, if you haven't done it. So that's where you got to start. You got to start that way for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is if you don't know who you are, what you bring to the party, and how you define it, how are you going to sell yourself to somebody? And make no doubt about it, career transition is about selling yourself to someone else. Okay. I don't mean that in an immoral way, but you have capabilities and experience that when presented properly to the right employer, going to make you the selected candidate to go do whatever it is they need to do. I think the other thing people need to do is they got to think about more than just the job. Dave and I talk in the book about your life journey. And the earlier you can start defining what that is, and it may evolve over time, but if you start thinking about your legacy, sit back and go, when I get older and I'm sitting in the rocking chair with the grandkids, what do I want the story to be? What do I want to accomplish? What do I want to be known for? What are those things that are important to me in the long run? And I think, unfortunately, far too many people are too focused on the near-term kibbles and bits. They don't take the time to think about that.
Yeah.
So if you don't know who you are, what you bring to the party, how you define success, or what your legacy is, you're kind of starting to wander through the fog in the jungle without any real course. So anyway, that's kind of a long answer to a great question, but you gotta understand who you are, man.
That perspective is that's something I don't even know if I've ever considered. I have been lucky enough to find amazing career at post-military and have been enjoying what I'm doing, but I see the impact that we have over the military community every single day, but I've never sat back and thought for my own personal journey, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Like, what do I want to tell my grandkids that I accomplished in whatever space I worked in? So that perspective is definitely something to really tap into and can definitely lead you down the right path for sure.
Yeah, and you and I I feel very lucky to be working with veterans day in and day out. So landing here has been just a fantastic opportunity. And I know it doesn't work out that way for everyone where they find their niche. They find exactly what they want to do immediately after. So it's definitely a tough thing. And I know in your books, you do talk about landing, but then you also talk about the integration piece where you're here and you need to get acquainted with the company, who you are within that company and what you can provide. So what advice would you give to transitioning folk or maybe those folks that are already transitioned and they just landed that first job?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And as we looked at this, Dave and I looked at this, we realized that landing is one thing. And as I just described, it's, landing is, but you got to do something afterwards. So, think about that parachute thing. Okay, so you're on the drop zone and you've landed. You didn't break anything. You've cut loose the chute. You've bagged it all up, did whatever you needed to do. Well, now what? And what we kind of came up with is that when you land, the very first few days in that new job, your job is really to identify the who's and the what's around you. Just start identifying things. get a picture of the lay of the land. Okay. What are the people? Who are the people rather? How are they arranged? What are the processes that are relevant to your job and relevant to the business? What are the products and services that your company builds, provides, and sells? You don't have to figure it all out. Just start getting an idea of identifying what those things are. And as you start to identify them all, kind of take some time in the evening or the morning when you're on a run, having a cocktail, whatever it is you do when you're not at work, and go, okay, what's the evidence that I'm finding as I identify whether this fits with my preferences and my life journey? Okay. So it's the first step in landing is about identifying people, processes, product, and service. Just understand what's around you.
Yeah.
Now, that's only for the first few days. The next piece then is to your point, Raul, is to integrate well. And that's about learning about the people, learning about the processes, learning about the products and services. What do they do? How do they add value? How do they all fit together? How much does my position, my role, my job depend on all these other things? Because, there are other people and processes and stuff in the business that are there, but not every job touches every other job all the time. There are others that you have to interact with every day. So you got to learn everything you can as broadly and as deeply as you can as you integrate for that first few months. Okay. Because if you integrate well, you're setting yourself up for a solid kind of launch pad for the future. If you integrate and over time, and this could be a few months, it could be a little longer, it could be a little shorter, depending on your particulars, then you kind of move into this longer term thriving and surviving kind of phase of your career, your job, your time with that organization. And when you're trying to thrive and survive, it's really about leveraging everything you've identified and everything you've learned to help be successful and add value to the business, but also to be successful and add value to your career in your life. So long answer, great question.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to the integrating piece, it's so crazy, the remote work and the work from home piece, that integrating for a lot of people might be brand new. I remember I got a laptop, and I think the company sent over like a decent sized screen, and all my new coworkers were across, in my laptop. It actually wasn't until recently where I met like probably 99% of the company at a company-wide meeting. So for a lot of new, for a lot of people entering this workforce, if you do happen to work remote, at least in my experience and Gabby's experience, has been interesting, kind of trying to tie in that integration piece, through a computer screen.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. There's each organization has its own culture, it has its own norms, it has its own expectations. And as you land and identify these things, and as you integrate and learn more about them, you go, how well does that fit with what my definition of success is? I've been in a couple companies where, it was well paying and I love the duties and responsibilities. And I kind of look around, and the more I integrate, the more I go, I really don't like some of these aspects of some of the people we don't get along, and we're never going to get along. And some of the processes just don't make sense, or I really am not all about the product and service they provide here. It doesn't thrill me. So you got to make some judgments along the way and go, how well does the positive outweigh the negatives that I'm seeing? And if and when you find some things you go, man, this just doesn't feel like a fit, for the love of God, don't do something stupid. Okay.
Don't burn any bridges.
Don't burn any bridges. Yeah. Don't make some knee-jerk reaction going, this is bad, I'm out. Now, if it's illegal, immoral, unethical, and it truly is bad, well, then you got to do what you got to do, right? But the world is small, and people and companies and industries know each other. And networking isn't just about transitioning. Networking is about understanding your brand and continuing to build and evolve that brand over time. So, if you make some knee-jerk reactions and maybe make some questions that aren't that, or I'm sorry, make some decisions that aren't that prudent, that's always going to be in your rearview mirror, and some folks may know about it.
Precisely. And we had a great comment by one of our LinkedIn viewers, Bridget Wells, and she mentioned that integration can already be hard for military folks. From what she's heard, they tend to be rougher around the edges, and I would agree with that. To a certain extent, not everyone, individuals like Raul and myself, we worked in the public affairs realm for our entire military career, so we maybe not be, we don't have that grunt aspect where they've been shooting artillery, and sending rounds downrange for their military career. There are individuals who have been placed in just a fully professional and office type career. So I can definitely understand where she's coming from and saying that transition and integration process for some veterans can be a bit rougher and less easy to transition to. So what main aspects, what main points would you have for those individuals that just find integration, find connecting to the civilian side a bit more difficult than, say, someone?
Yeah, Bridget, thank you. Yeah, Bridget, thank you for bringing that up, because integration can be hard for military veterans. Sometimes because we really are a little rougher. Mm-hmm. Not so that we're unprofessional. We just tend to be more direct.
Exactly.
We come from a world where the mission is all about important stuff, life and death stuff, national interest stuff. So we tend to have a little bit more, I say this carefully, serious approach to things, and tend, by and large, to be pretty quick at making decisions, pretty agile in varying circumstances, really good at cutting through the fluff and getting to the issue and moving from, hey, we got a problem, to let's clarify that problem. Let's figure out what the alternatives are. Let's make a decision. And then we have a bias towards action. Uh-huh. There's nothing wrong with that. No. Except that 93% of the population never served in uniform. They don't have, most of them, a similar background. I was absolutely guilty of that. I mean, I was like, let's go. And I was direct, and I didn't think I was being rough. And I had a number of folks tell me along the way, it's like, dude, you got to cool your jets, man. They're moving faster than we move. Even if it's not about rough, the op tempo can be different.
Yes.
So that's all observation. What's the insight? Because you got to go in and look at it and understand what you're seeing. And you got to understand that that company, that organization has, probably been around before you. Mm-hmm. It's probably going to be around after you. It probably has some things that can improve, but it likely has a whole lot of things it does successfully. Mm-hmm. So if you can you got to be you. I mean, you got to be authentic and you got to be you. But if you can kind of shore up the edges a little bit and go, how do I bring my capabilities to this organization in a way that they can hear and accept? That's the difference, I mean, you can walk in and you can call the baby ugly and go, this is screwed up and that's screwed up and here's how I'm going to fix it. And, you put yourself at risk, right? And the other issue is there's a whole lot of perception and bias out there that, the military is too rigid, we're too hard. It already exists. So think about it in your own personal situation. How do I observe what's going on, use the great agility skills I have to adjust my presence and my approach so it better fits and lands well with the others? Mm-hmm. And the other bit is, how can I take all these capabilities and offer solutions in a manner and at a pace that the organization's more willing to accept? So great question, Bridget.
Exactly.
That's a great piece there, Bill, on the integration part. And I wonder if you can speak on how often do you see, because sometimes it doesn't always work out. I know I was speaking about me and Gabby landing. I mean, this was my first job right after transitioning. So it's been great. I think, Gabby, you had one or two before.
I worked on a couple contracts before this, but nothing, completely different type of atmosphere, and both amazing careers. And I'm so glad I got to work with the individuals I did. But with this space, you're actually touching the military community. So yeah, it's been great.
Exactly. And I just wanted to throw on there, Bill, when it doesn't work out, right? When you kind of look internally and you look around and you're like, me fitting in here probably isn't the best idea. I'm going to find something that makes me a little happier. What would your advice be, once you make that decision, where do you start from there? What kind of mindset? Because some people might, take it the wrong way where, man, maybe I should have stayed in instead of, kind of looking internally again and just saying, hey, I'm gonna hop on to the next thing. I'm gonna find something that's better for me out there. What's your advice to those individuals moving on from that first job?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so great question, and let me give a little background information before I get to the specific answer. Syracuse University, IVMF, Institute of Veterans and Military Families, and I think DoD have studies out there, multiple studies. 45-50% of veterans leave their first civilian job after the military in the first year.
Yeah.
And 75-80% leave within 2 years. That's not because they're bad employees. That's not because they're bad employers. It's because it's a mismatch. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things we could talk about there, but Raul, to your particular question, when that happens, it happened to me. I've had 7 transitions. Okay. It's happened to me, and it's going to happen to all of us, right? You got to acknowledge the emotion. Because if I did it voluntarily, there's still that sense of, man, I screwed that up. How did I do that? Or if it happens involuntarily, either they say, you're just not a fit, we're going to let you go, or they reorganize or whatever. You got to acknowledge the emotion and process it however you positively process it, and then get past the emotion and go, okay, here's where I am. I like to advise folks to think about career transition, whether it's your first one or a subsequent one. You've got to think about this stuff logically, and you've got to apply those problem-solving skills, those decision-making skills that bias towards action that you developed in the military. Because it's easy to get mired in the emotion of it. But the more you get mired in the emotion, oftentimes the less effective you are in really seeing the situation clearly, in really assessing what you can do different. Do an AAR on yourself. Do an after action review. Okay, what's the lessons learned? What did I do well, and how do I repeat that? And what things didn't work out, and how do I make sure I don't repeat those? Okay, if you can get to the logical part of your brain, which is easier for some folks than others, everybody's a little bit different, but if you can get to the logical side of it and deal with the emotions as you best positively can, I think it's an important first step. This job didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? Well, it didn't work out because it really isn't what I thought it was. Okay, check. So what does that mean? As I do my next search, I have to better vet the employer. Okay, why didn't it work out? Well, I didn't realize they were going through bankruptcy. And okay, so again, I got to better vet the employer. It didn't work out because of personal issues between people. There was no real appreciation for veterans. Or another good one is they hired me because the community I came out of, they needed somebody that's familiar with it. So they hired me for my connections. But I feel like I've kind of been used. Well, okay. So I'll suggest there's opportunity to look at this pragmatically. Hard to do, but to do it pragmatically and go, what isn't working? Can I tell you a quick story?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Okay, so my first job out of the mill, I had a horrible transition. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know where I was going. I mean, it was bad. But I eventually landed a job as Deputy Director of Economic Development for the county I live in. Now, that's a pretty cool title.
Yeah.
It paid $28,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
The team was 3 people. Now this was 1997, and I'm reasonably good with my money, so that was enough to keep me afloat, right? It was 3 people on the team: the director, myself, and an administrative person. The purpose of the agency was to attract and retain employers in our county. That was attract and retain business, right? A lot of other bits with that. we had a gigantic board of directors. It was public officials and, kind of the bigger name business folks in the county. And they did a great job. Very good at what they did. I didn't have a clue what they did. I didn't have a clue how they did it. I thought I had this great title and I'm going to do big, sexy, impactful stuff. And I'm, cataloging future business sites, and I'm administrating an enterprise zone, and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with tax increment financing. And I'm going, I understand the value and appreciate the importance. This is not tripping my trigger. The director, a couple months in, left. 5-6 months in, she left, took a job at The Hague in the Netherlands. And the board came and said, would you be interested in being the director? I said, well, I don't have anything else really lined up. So sure, it paid a little bit more, but still not great money. I had also been networking. The week after they announced I was going to be the director, in the newspapers and all that stuff, I took a job as a training manager for a $3 billion air freight company at a 300% pay increase. Three times.
You're done good.
Yeah. So sometimes the transition is a good thing. So, but in order to do all that, I looked at it. I didn't get down and out about, man, this isn't what I thought. This isn't working. I'm not doing the sexy, exciting, important, strategic things I thought I'd be doing. I was like, okay, it is what it is. Got to look at the realities of the battlefield. And then I have to start making contingency plans about what I'm going to do to change things. And then I got to take the action that, I decided to take. So anyway, kind of a long story.
No, it's a very relatable story. There was many points. I got out in the Camp Lejeune area of North Carolina, and 3 months after just having my second kid, my son, and that was November of 2019, which, if you recall, about 4 or 5 months later is when COVID hit. So I was very just blessed and grateful to even have gotten a contract position back on base, because I stayed in North Carolina for a few years longer through a networking connection, another female veteran Marine who was in public affairs, and actually I replaced her in the position. And it was one of those situations where the working environment was phenomenal. We had a hybrid work environment as well. The people I worked with were amazing. And the pay was almost double what I was making as a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. But the work wasn't exactly resonating with me. It was more like updating orders. I was the Eastern District Regional Marketing Director. It was only me for all of the Department of Energy facilities on base. So I had to learn how electricity works and how power lines work, all of that stuff. Some really great knowledge, but I'm probably the least technical person you will ever meet in your entire life. It takes me 20 minutes to connect something to Bluetooth. But it was, it was definitely one of those things where you do some self-reflecting. You're like, man, I really love the people I work with. I feel like I am making somewhat of a difference, but it isn't exactly my passion. And, I continued filling the role to my end of contract and found something new, and eventually ended my way here. But your story completely resonated with me. You're looking at everything from every different aspect. Okay, what are the pros? What are the cons? So it's extremely relatable, your story. So great story. We appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things Dave and I put in our second book, which shameless plug. That's the second one.
Yeah, tell us what it is, where we can get it also, because I'm sure we could all learn regardless of how long it's been since we
Sure. They're both available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. So you can go on Amazon, you type in Bill Kieffer, you'll find it. It'll pop up pretty quick. Red, white, and blue. Did that on purpose. But one of the things, inside of the land, integrate, thrive, and survive kind of phases of one's career, we really realize that most business folks deal with the myriad issues that that face them in 3 kind of buckets: people, process, and product or service. So as you're landing, you start to identify who are the people, what are the processes, and what are the products and services. As you integrate, learn more about them and how they fit together. And as you thrive and survive, you want to leverage everything you know and learn about people, process, product, and service. So in our book, we go in great depth and we break those down into even further bits. So on the people side of those, we break it down, you got to look at the people that are internal to the company. Yourself. Pay attention to yourself. Don't forget your direct team, your peers that are out there. People are similarly situated. You're a manager of HR. Well, there's going to be a manager of operations. Okay. And then look at the people more broadly in the organization, as I mentioned before. Some of them you'll work with regularly, other ones are just kind of out there, but you need to know who they are and what they do. Okay. You also have to think about the external people that impact or are impacted by your job. Who are your clients? Who's giving you money to go do what you do, right? Who are the external partners or the suppliers or vendors? And who's your competitors? These are things you need to start to identify and know over time. On the process side of things, there's kind of 3 buckets of processes that you need to focus on over time. What are the business processes that exist? What are the process expectations for your particular job? What do you got to deliver, and what's the scope and authority, and how is it organized, and what's your network, and what's the reporting, and what's the flow of goods and all that stuff. And then interesting too, I think for the longer term, is what are the talent processes related to your organization and your company? How do they do workforce planning? How do they do hiring and onboarding? Now, if you're just recently hired, you've kind of experienced that as an individual, right? But think about that in terms of the longer term. What if I want to get promoted? What if I started at this level, but I want to be, VP of whatever? How does that work here? Is there a process? Is there a formal process, or is it just informal? How do they do it? And if I'm interested in that, how do I get myself into the lanes that I need to get into so I can avail myself of those opportunities, right? And then on the product and service side, it's really important to understand the business product or services. What are those products they've been doing for years, and what are kind of the current ones that they're focused on, and what are the future ones they're going out to, and what are the risks and opportunities and so forth related to each of those. Which of these products or services are the cash cows? Man, there's just, you can count on it. And which ones are the ones that today are burning capital, that they're investing in? It's costing them money because they think there's a future return. That all impacts how you can thrive and survive in the future. For example, I was working with a major automotive supplier for several years, and we had some products that had been on the Jeeps, the Jeep Wrangler now, for like 70 years. Well, guess what? Those are cash cows. There's a margin there, and you're incrementally improving them, and always trying to do the little bit better. And then there are the new products, like things related to electrification, electrification of trucks and personal vehicle. And you got to spend a lot of money to do all that upfront work to make these commercially successful. Think about who you are and how do you fit with all that. If I just want to do something, I got out of the military, I did my, 30 years, whatever. I want a 9 to 5 and I don't need a lot of hoopla. Maybe you want to be attached to a product or service that is just incremental. It's just always going to get a little bit better, and we're going to do a little bit value add to it. If, on the other hand, I want to do something new and exciting and creative and maybe a little more risk, well, then you want to be affiliated with some of these newer kind of emerging kind of products and services, right? And then finally on that, you always want to remember that you are a product providing a service to the employer. Be mindful of what your capabilities are and how you're growing your capabilities. Remember your why, and be mindful that your wants and needs are important too. And as things evolve, check where you are with all that. So anyway, I don't want to read you the whole book, but
it's definitely a good reminder to keep, is to constantly check in with yourself. Is this still fulfilling your needs? Are you still fulfilling the organization's needs? Are you still bringing something to the table to them? And are they reciprocating that? Are you growing within the capacity that you wish to grow within that organization? So perfect advice. If there was 3 bullet points or a single sentence to sum up all of the wealth of knowledge that you've given us today. What would you say? What's the biggest takeaway for our military community when it comes to this transition and maintaining?
Well, for transition, the first thing is start early.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, start early. Now that doesn't mean you got to be building resumes and LinkedIn profiles immediately, but start early and start with you, because you at the end of the day are what you're presenting to the employment market. So if you don't understand what it is, you're not going to be able to tell anybody clearly what that is. Okay, so you got to start early. You got to start with you. I think you also have to remember that this is an important point. Employers do this whole hiring and succession planning and all talent management stuff. They have two core questions that they always say, and everything else leads to these two core questions. Who is the person that, one, is best able to successfully do the work I need done? And two, who's going to fit well with the team? That's it. Everything boils down to those two things. And if you can keep that in your mind when you're transitioning, and then once you've landed, keep that in mind. It's like, I got to perform and I got to fit well with the team. Then you can do all this other work, identify the who's and the what's, and, learn all about them and leverage them, and then check in with yourself. I guess the third point is check in with yourself along the way. Because if you're not going in a direction that you want and need to be going in to fulfill your legacy, nobody else is going to change it for you. You really have to take ownership of it in a positive, thoughtful way. Deal with the emotional stuff because it can be tough.
Yeah.
But do it in a positive way. And for God's sakes, reach out for help. Nobody has to do this alone. Nobody has to do this alone.
Yeah.
Probably the best piece of advice is you are not alone. There are countless other individuals in your exact shoes who are experiencing the same, who are unaware of the resources out there, like Bill and like RecruitMilitary, and our partners that we work with, who are there specifically to ease that transition and then to set you up for success once you are in that civilian headspace. So, Bill, thank you again for joining us today. I know I've been taking notes along the way. I'm like, oh, this is a good reminder. So I always learn something, quite a few things from our guests. So thank you so much again for joining us. I'm sure Raul felt the same.
Yeah, no, appreciate the insight, Bill. I mean, this is great for both those that are getting ready to transition, those transitioning, and of course, the veterans are already out there, figuring out where they fit in the company and whether they need to move on or not. So it's awesome.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. If I can do anything to help you or any of your listeners, give me a shout. I'm all over LinkedIn.
Thank you. And we will be checking out the Military Career Transition on Amazon. That's going to be my next read for the next couple of days. So thank you for that. Thank you again, Bill, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this episode of RecruitMilitary Live, and we will see you next time.
Take care.
See ya.